The Lord of Darkness, Part 2, Chapter 4, Abel. The other seraphim were appalled by Nick's action against Lucifer. We are deeply peaceful people. It's literally the talk of the century if one of us slaps another. In our eyes, one seraph permanently scarring another was roughly equivalent to a human brutally murdering a fellow human, then hanging the corpse outside as a warning to others. We were horror-stricken. The last few decades didn't do Nick any favors either. After committing a major sin that jeopardized humanity, he dodged most social engagements with the other archangels and was openly hostile whenever he did show up. Then he brutally attacked Lucifer, his own brother, before further isolating himself. Nick avoided us as much as possible and wouldn't talk about the incident or anything other than work, which suited a lot of archangels just fine. For my part, wanting Nick to show up was mostly business-related. It was my job to maintain open communication between the archangels, and his refusal to communicate made it a frustrating challenge. Michael was devastated. He walked around like a lost puppy for months. His very best friend, who he did everything with, did something unforgivable, then vanished. Not to mention, a great deal of Michael's ego was wrapped up in being an excellent archangel of security, and Nick had dealt him another professional blow. First, Nick tricked Michael into being an accomplice in a major security breach, resulting in a scandal. And now, Michael had failed to prevent Nick from committing the first recorded instance of seraph-on-seraph violence in eons. He managed to hold his head high by reminding himself that this was all temporary, and soon everything would go back to the way it should be. Nick was exhausted. He worked harder and longer days than he was used to. In his free time, he occasionally hung out with the archdemons and the rest of his hell team. He spent time with Abel. He explored the uninhabited expanses of the cosmos, as far away from us as he could get. On the rare occasions he visited his room in heaven, he'd do something depressing, like sitting just outside a cave in the mud in the middle of a thunderstorm. And that's exactly what he was doing when there was a rare knock on his door. He glared at it, as did the cymbal-playing monkey on his shirt. "Who is it?" "Abel. Nothing urgent. I can come back later," was the muffled reply. Abel had recently ascended into heaven. Although he frequented Nick's office in hell, this was the first time he'd come to Nick's room in heaven unexpectedly. Abel must have looked for him in hell, and probably several other places, before thinking to check here. Nick scrambled to his feet and called back, "No, now's fine, just give me a sec." He quickly waved away the storm and changed the scenery to a pine forest. The ground was a little bouncy due to a thick layer of pine needles that accumulated beneath the trees. Nick ran to the door and threw it open. "You're soaked," Abel observed. Nick improvised. "Yeah, well, I didn't get a first life to try out stuff like wet clothes. Now I know. It sucks." He willed himself dry and ushered Abel inside. Abel's brown curls bounced enthusiastically as he slipped into the room and closed the door. He wore his standard attire, a light blue shirt, brown loafers, and creamy linen pants. Since Celestials can will ourselves clean, many stick to one outfit for long stretches of time before tiring of it. "How can I help?" Nick asked. Abel avoided eye contact. "It's dumb." "Out with it." "How come I'm not aging?" Abel wanted to know. "Oh," said Nick. Abel continued. "I met this guy named Georgie who died of illness when he was 6, and now he looks 30. All the people born in heaven grow up. What's wrong with me?" "Nothing," Nick assured him. "Nothing's wrong with you. You're perfect just the way you are." Abel rolled his eyes. "You know what I mean." Nick sighed. "Yeah. The truth is, you look how you believe you ought to look. And for you, it's complicated because of how you died. Lots of murder victims get stuck in a form because the trauma stops them from seeing themselves different from how they were that day. But we got people to help with that." "I thought that's what hell's therapists are for," Abel protested. "You don't think they helped?" Nick asked. "No, they helped," Abel admitted. "Good," Nick said. "Just because you're done with penance doesn't mean you're done with therapy. You ought to go back. Here's a list of therapists who specialize in murder cases. Just tell them I sent you. Work through the trauma, and you can look however you want." "Thanks," Abel replied, pocketing the list. "But you might want to keep looking like this after," Nick suggested. "How come?" For starters, you're adorable, Nick told him, attempting to tussle the boy's hair, but Abel dodged with a grin. That hair and freckles? Total heartthrob. Plus, people underestimate you when you look young. You learn a lot of truth that way. Is that why you dress like that? Abel asked. Nick smirked. It's also real comfortable. Adam perished of illness nearly 30 years after Abel. He got into heaven straight away. Not surprisingly, since we choose our prophets with great care. And we were all deeply relieved that he and Nick weren't forced to meet. In retrospect, I think Nick would have done a fine job guiding Adam into heaven, but at the time, we were all still reeling from the Mark of Cain incident and completely distrusted our archangel of faith and penance. When Abel came to tell him the news, Nick was in his office in hell trying to play a squash, an alien instrument that was clearly meant for someone with at least 3 mouths. He could have grown temporary mouths when playing, but preferred to futilely attempt it in his normal form. His shirt pictured 2 music notes dancing joyfully, with a musical rest futilely trying to stop them. Abel burst into the room, running into Nick's desk in his excitement. Nick chuckled. Hey, Abel, what's up? My dad died, he exclaimed. Congratulations, Nick replied. They spent a moment smiling widely at each other, one with genuine delight, the other with practiced deceit. It's not that Nick wasn't happy for Abel, he truly was, but he'd been dreading this day for decades. When he first met Abel, he saw only an opportunity to get indirectly closer to Eve, but Nick quickly came to love the boy for who he was. Still, Nick wasn't Abel's father. Adam claimed that title, both biologically and by right of having raised him to adulthood. Nick was sure Abel would abandon him now that his real dad was back, even if Abel himself hadn't realized it yet. Well, I guess that's all, Abel said. Sorry to interrupt. See you later. Yeah, later, Nick said, sadly watching the enthusiastic human teleport away. To Nick's surprise and delight, Abel returned a few weeks later. When he arrived, Nick was in the middle of scolding a demon reaper. Nick's shirt depicted the last tree in a forest, clearly anguished, surrounded by the stumps of its brethren. The reaper wore a black hooded, sleeveless sweatshirt and baggy black pants. They both stopped talking abruptly to stare at Abel. I can come back later, Abel offered, backing out of the room. No, stay. We're just about done, Archangel Nick of Penance and Faith told him. To the demon he added, unless you got more to discuss. Nope, I'm good, the demon said quickly, scampering out of the room before he could be reprimanded further. Take a seat, Nick smiled, materializing 2 comfy armchairs by the roaring fire. Drink? He offered, materializing Abel's favorite celestial liquor in a pair of tumblers. Yes, please, Abel exclaimed with more enthusiasm than Nick had expected, and finished his drink in seconds. Nick refilled it for him. Everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine, Abel assured him. I'm just frustrated and I need a vent. Vent away. My dad's driving me crazy, Abel confessed. Don't get me wrong, he's my dad and I love him and I love spending time with him, but he wants to spend all his time with me. It's what he looked forward to most about heaven, recapturing missed moments with me. When I tell him I need some time to myself, he looks like I slapped him in the face, and he keeps treating me like I'm 17. Sorry to hear it, Nick lied. I'm sure he'll get it eventually. Abel sighed. Yeah, thanks. I really had to get that off my chest. Anytime. 2 years later, Eve died of old age. No particular illness did it. It was the culmination of many small things. She lived a good life and was headed straight for heaven, which was a relief, honestly, because we hadn't figured out how Nick would manage hell with her there. Eve opened her eyes in the gray void and sat up calmly. Zad, archangel of heavenly admissions and charity, stood before her in a resplendent white hooded robe. Do you know where you are? Am I dead? Eve guessed. Zad nodded approvingly. Yes. How did I do? You're going straight to heaven, Archangel Zad assured her. Eve sighed with relief. Cain and Abel? Adam? Cain was still alive at this point, but Adam and Eve had assumed his death when he never returned home. And Eve knew that Seth, her 3rd son, who rarely gets a mention due to his lack of involvement in a murder, was also still alive. Cain's alive, Zad said. Eve squealed, laughed, and sobbed with joy all at once. Zad continues. Abel and Adam are in heaven, but you should know that Adam's death terminated your marriage. I'll walk you through orientation when you're ready and give you a psychic map of heaven that highlights the locations of your room, your son's rooms, and heaven's most popular public rooms and gardens. Then you're free to roam around." Eve waited for several thunderous heartbeats before asking, "How do I find someone else?" Zad materialized a screen open to a celestial search app and handed it to Eve. "This is a screen. You tap your finger here and say the name of the person you want to find. The screen shows you possible matches. You tap on the right one, and it sends that person a request to meet. Give it a try." Eve tapped the button and said, "Archangel Nick." The screen turned red and threw up an error. Zad's welcoming smile slid off her face. "He's off limits." "Why?" Eve desperately needed to know. "Part of Nick's penance forbids you from seeing each other," Zad informed her. "Penance for what?" Eve asked. Zad looked at her, bewildered, and spoke as if she were a child. "For exposing you to the knowledge of good and evil millennia early." Eve's face crumpled. "Because of me?" "No, because of him," Zad said firmly. "He knew better. You didn't. Obviously. You didn't know the difference between good and evil yet, so all your actions before that didn't count for or against you." Eve frowned. "So, actions only count for people who know the difference between good and evil?" "No, it's species-wide," Zad explained. "We assume you're all capable of it once one of you proves it. That's why it was such a big deal when Nick gave you too much knowledge you couldn't have thought of yourself. The rest of humanity wasn't close to ready." "Why not make an exception?" Eve wondered. "Because the knowledge was already on Earth," Zad said, the way someone might say, because 2 + 2 = 4. "So?" Eve asked. "I don't understand the question." "Wow," Eve said to herself. To Zad, she asked, "Can I see him when his penance ends?" "No," Zad told her. "Oh, cheer up. You dodged a spear with that nutcase. He ruined your world and clearly did a number on you, too. This is the best thing for you." Eve's eyes were brimming with tears when she said, "I'm ready to move on now." "Are you sure?" Zad asked. "Most people wait until they're done crying. I should also tell you a lot more about the afterlife first." Eve nodded emphatically. "I'm sure. I'd like to leave now, please." Zad shrugged. "Suit yourself. Oh, and you won't be able to perceive Nick or information about him once you leave the gray void. It might be a little disorienting at first, but you'll get used to it. Have a nice afterlife." Eve wiped the tears from her eyes before stepping through the portal into heaven. The next day, Abel tracked down Nick in hell. He still looked 17, now by choice. Abel burst into the conference room just as Nick was wrapping up a staff meeting. While the room itself was fairly plain, the conference table that dominated it was a work of pure genius. It was made of hundreds of stalagmites grouped together and all roughly the same height. All the holes and uneven surfaces were accounted for by a cleverly designed local gravity plane that hovered just above the table, providing a perfectly smooth surface on which to set things. "Meeting adjourned," said Nick, whose shirt depicted a person either leaping out of a turbulent vortex or being sucked into one. He waited impatiently for the room to empty and motioned for Abel to make himself comfortable. Abel sat at the table and ran a finger across its surface with interest. When all the demons left, Nick asked, "So, what's up?" Abel said. "I got nothing." Abel tried again. "Yesterday, Nick shook his head. "Just heard yesterday." "Maybe try guessing?" Abel suggested. "I got nothing to go on and no way of knowing if I guess it," Nick argued. "Heaven," Abel said. "Something happened in heaven yesterday." "Something you skip over?" Abel pointed out. Nick's face crumpled when realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He stood up quickly and turned away from Abel so the boy couldn't see all the emotions roiling through him. He whispered, "Thanks for telling me," since speaking louder risked his voice breaking. "You okay?" asked Abel. "Oh yeah, I'm fine," Nick lied unconvincingly, pulling a flask out of his pocket dimension and taking a long swig. "This doesn't change anything. I still can't see her. She could be standing right there at any moment and I'd never know, but I'm fine." He flung a chair across the room, shattering it against the wall. "Nick, are you?" Abel realized. I don't know what you're asking, Nick lamented. Tell your mom I said hi. Not that she can hear you. I'll do my best, Abel said, not realizing it was a promise he'd later break. The decades were harsh on Cain. He tormented himself with an endless mental tirade of self-loathing. He was certain the mark on his face meant God had cast him away. He drank heavily and brawled regularly. Still, he made it through 96.79 revolutions around your sun, had a wife and son of his own, and a small farm east of Eden. By the time Cain died, Abel had been in heaven so long he scarcely remembered why he'd been so angry about the whole murder thing. He and Nick dressed in Reaper uniforms and went to greet his brother. Normally this wouldn't be allowed, since the grave void is a place to adjust before interacting with others in the afterlife, but Nick pulled some strings. My keeper, Abel said gleefully, unable to resist the jibe. He then wrapped Cain in a bear hug. Relax, brother. I forgave you a long time ago. Cain wept, Abel comforted him, and Nick felt superfluous. After the tears and apologies ran out, Abel explained where they were and where Cain was going on his journey to heaven. Nick considered chiming in a few times, but Abel did a fine job of explaining without his input. After Cain digested all the information, he nodded towards Nick and asked, Who's he? Where are my manners? Abel exclaimed. Cain, meet Archangel Nick. Nice to meet you, Nick said, shaking Cain's hand. Nick took vengeance on the guy who gave you that scar, Abel continued bluntly. Nick chuckled uncomfortably. Let's not make me sound like a psycho right out of the gate. Sorry, said Abel. To Cain, he continued. He runs hell, but more importantly, When he finished talking, they were both staring at Nick intently. And how feel about him? Cain asked. Nick would have obliterated civilizations to hear the answer to that question. A couple of years later, Seth, Adam and Eve's least memorable son, perished. The poor boy was born after Abel's death and Cain's disappearance. He grew up futilely trying to make his parents happy, and later trying to make everyone happy. He made it directly into heaven, so Nick couldn't be there. Zad greeted Seth and pointed him in the direction of some celestials who could teach him how to stop neglecting his own happiness. Abel sent Cain a prayer about Seth's passing, since Cain was still in hell and had no other way of finding out. Years earlier, Cain and Seth had met at their mother's funeral and eventually became friends and brothers. Abel had never met Seth in life, but was very enthusiastic about meeting him in the afterlife. You can't screw it up, Cain assured him. Everyone gets along with Seth. Even I get along with Seth. Thanks, replied Abel, audibly smiling. You know, I always wanted a big brother like you. You know what I mean. Talk to you later. The prayer ended, and Cain was left marveling at how well he and Abel seemed to get along after, and because of, all this time. He stood up decisively and strode over to the Archangel of Penance's office. The door was open, so Cain walked in without knocking. Nick was staring intently at a number of screens floating around him. His shirt depicted the concept of day and night, anthropomorphized, desperately in love, and tragically cursed, kissing goodbye in the brief moment they have together at dawn. As soon as Nick noticed his visitor, he exclaimed, Cain, hi! You said your door's always open, Cain reminded him. Absolutely, for you, always open, Nick confirmed, closing all his screens. Please, take a seat. How can I help? Seth's dead. I see. How are you feeling? Nick asked. Cain shrugged. Okay. You ought to know there's no way I can get you a pass to visit him, Nick said. He can come here if he wants. Oh, awesome, Cain replied. That's not why I'm here, though. Oh, why are you here? Asked Archangel Nick. It's about Abel. Nick leapt to his feet in a panic. What happened to Abel? Cain chuckled. Nothing. Calm down. I want to thank you for looking after him and stuff. I like him now, and I think you did that, or helped. So, thanks. You're welcome, Nick said. They stared at each other for a moment before Cain broached the subject. About my scar. Nick scowled. We banned that awful tradition. Good, but I already knew that from my file, Cain explained. Except Abel said you took vengeance on the guy who scarred me, and it doesn't say anything about that. Nick sighed. No, it wouldn't, because I'm not exactly proud of it. I'd say it keeps me up at night, except I never sleep anyway. but it was necessary. If I tell you this, you gotta promise you won't go spreading it around, because frankly, I get enough crap from my family already. I promise, Kane said. Nick ran a hand through his hair. Okay, I've done more than my fair share of pranks gone wrong, and that's not what happened to you, no matter what anyone says. The truth is, you're not just the first murderer in humanity's judgment age. You're the firstborn son of the woman who passed that milestone too early. It's all my fault, but a lot of people hold it against her too. The pranks are supposed to be good-natured, but Lucifer straight up attacked you because he thought it was acceptable. I made sure no one else made the same mistake by giving him a scar to match yours and the message that your family's under my protection. Nobody's dared fuck with you since. Thanks, said Kane a little uncertainly. An uncomfortable silence ensued. Something else you want to talk about? Nick asked. Kane blurted out, I've been here almost 2 years and nothing's changed. These penance assignments aren't working. No shortcuts in penance, Archangel Nick of Penance explained. You just gotta put in the work, simple as that. I'm trying. I know you are, Nick replied gently, nodding at the gratitude seminar brochure poking out of Kane's pocket. I said it's simple, not easy. Some assignments don't seem right, Kane said. I mean, they seem sort of evil? Exactly, Kane exclaimed. God doesn't tell us to commit evil, Nick told him. Some of it looks bad, but that's just because we can't see the big picture. Only God can. Why doesn't God just stop evil in the first place? Wondered Kane. Nick held out his hand, and nearby shadows swept toward it as if through magnetism, hovering above his palm in a small perfect sphere. Look here, what do you see? Darkness, Kane said. How do you know? Nick pressed. There's no light. Nick smiled. Exactly. Light and darkness define each other, and so do good and evil. Wanting a world without evil is like wanting a fire that cooks food but doesn't burn you. Kane argued, You say that like it's crazy, but you could have made fire that way, couldn't you? Yeah, but there's more to it than that, Nick replied. Fire only protects you from wild animals because it burns, and it transforms everything it touches. Fire destroys everything, Kane pointed out. Nick shook his head. Only God can create and destroy matter. Everything else just changes it. Fire and evil are great catalysts for change. So, Kane challenged, you don't need change if everything's perfect to start with. Nick chuckled. You'd be surprised how quickly that gets boring. Yeah, but we could have been perfect to start with, Kane said. Nick pulled an imp marionette off his shelf. It was squat and red with small horns and a black goatee. Nick's puppetry skills were mediocre, but he did his best to make the marionette walk over to Kane and say, Ain't you a handsome fella? Kane was tempted to roll his eyes, but remembering the gratitude seminar, he simply told Nick, Thanks. Why thank me? Nick asked. The imp said it. Yeah, but you made it say it, Kane pointed out. Nick nodded. So we agree then. The imp can't do good or evil because it can't control its actions. We can't be good if we don't have a real choice. But why didn't God make us want to do good? Kane asked. Do you want to do good? Of course. Well, there you go, said Nick. And you didn't start from scratch. All our chosen people are inherently social, and we tweak your environments to force you to collaborate. But temptation's out there, so we introduce you to it in a controlled environment till you can handle it. Don't worry, it gets easier with practice. And penance forces you to practice good behavior while you're making amends. It's not just now, either. After you get to heaven, you can still get penance if you sin again, no matter how much good you did in the meantime. Really? Kane asked. Really, Nick confirmed. I got unresolved penance now. The rules are different when you get into heaven. You gotta keep living there and stuff, but you still gotta do what it takes to make things right and become a better person. Huh, Kane mused. How do you figure out how to do that for all these people? Nick shrugged. I've been doing this a long time. Not every assignment's a perfect fit, but overall, we work miracles here in hell.